right? Which is that one thing the professor was saying in talking about the sort of intellectual, maybe academic, political side of this, is that at a moral level, it's heavily, if this is paganism, it's a much more egalitarian focused form of paganism, right, than what the paganism that we associate with the much more hierarchical aristocratic societies of at least pre-Christian Rome. And one question that I have is, when we talk about sort of de-Christianization or a pagan revolution, in certain ways, we lived through one in the West, in the sense that late 19th and early 20th century Europe, not just sort of popular culture, but high culture as well, was pervaded with very explicit forms of neo-paganism in certain ways, up to and including, W.B. Yeats and the fairies, right? I mean, this is not, fairies are a particular obsession of mine, but but since that ended where it ended, right, in National Socialism and everything associated with that, I wonder if there's sort of a permanent, maybe not permanent, but I think there's a clear desire in some quarters to move beyond Christianity, but never move beyond Christianity in that way again. Do you think where sort of, I mean, you've written about sort of Nietzschean sort of flirtations and forays, and those are often on the alt-right or the far right. But I mean, do either of you think that's at all a fair description of sort of today's relationship with the aristocratic side, or the hierarchical side, or the cruel side of a sort of pagan turn?
I guess, well, I think, yeah, probably that is a fair description of what a lot of people would like to do. But I guess something that's a point that I think is relevant to that and to this kind of, make your own religion, kind of boutique spirituality type of thing, that we've been talking about, is that that may be possible under certain circumstances and plausible. It might not be under all. I've been reading over the last couple of months some of the theologians around the early 20th century who were involved in the sort of fundamentalist modernist controversy, and I don't remember which one said this, but someone said, during good times, Christians tend to favor the Greek side of their religion, and during bad times, they shift to the Hebrew side of their religion. And there's something about this kind of spirituality that it seems to me is available when things are relatively prosperous, and people have their good life, their job or their position in the university or whatever, and then they can go down and enjoy a little spirituality of this kind or another. But I'm not sure that's sustainable under other kinds of circumstances. I think there can be circumstances that can push things in the direction of something more of a choice between, and again, I think that something like the scientific naturalism or the full-blown Christianity or other kinds of transcendent religion are just more intellectually coherent and rigorous positions than this kind of mushy middle, fashion your own religion thing. And I'm not sure that things may not occur that might push us one way or the other. That's why I'm just skeptical that kind of thing that can flourish now for a time, when most the middle-class people and so forth that are probably are relatively well off will necessarily be sustainable over the long haul.
Tara, do you want a last word before we?
Sure. No, going back to sort of the 19th century model, I think it's really telling because among the occultists of 19th century Europe, my doctorate was on this, I'm going to get really excited for a second, there was this kind of sense in which real occultism, real Satanism was contraposed with the sort of bourgeois alienation of modern life. Like Georges Calhismont's Là-bas, which is written in 1891, was basically all about this sort of disaffected man who discovers Satanism, but ultimately realizes that it's just like a bunch of people dressing up and there's no real Satanism, and the real Satan is the emptiness of modern life. And sort of actual like theistic Satanism is almost coded as a kind of re-enchantment, like a desirable re-enchantment of a world in which like there really could be black masses and blood sacrifices. And I think similarly, the sort of Nietzschean model that you brought up that I see in, the Jordan Peterson / all the way to the Bronze Age perverts of, because gotta get that in there every talk, of the world, a way in which this kind of cruel paganism, or the sort of brutal paganism, is coded as an opposition to an unenchanted modern life, but one that re-enchants, for better or for worse, and I would think worse, I believe, the body, a biological hierarchy, that is the kind of paganism of, blood and lobster dominance, and the idea that there is just like there is something in our bodies, in our hierarchies, in nature, that is enchanted, but not necessarily good. And I think that, as in the late 19th century, that model of we're going to venerate nature as a kind of divine force because it's the only way that we're not going to end up in alienated from our materialist, technology-driven lives. I see it very much as the same thing.